Hmm. So we just had like a 2 hour conversation with our aunt and uncle who were here visiting from Santa Barbara. I just made some observations as we were talking that I just wanted to like reflect on. Um, so human consciousness develops in a certain way, but people don't have an awareness of this unique development, and so the three things that I'm noticing create a lot of separations are the unknown and differences because they're just scary, and a defined sense of normalcy where if someone else has a different version of normal, there's judgment rather than compassion. And so fearing the unknown, fearing differences, and having a strict perception of what normalcy is supposed to look like cause a lot of separation between people. And this is on like a global scale. And then other aspects about consciousness is that the mind works, people tend to not have a direct awareness of this, but the mind works through making comparisons and associations. And without an awareness that this is just the way your body brain system is trying to understand reality and your own existence as a self, these comparisons and associations are often considered truth. They're just accepted as the reality rather than understanding that it's only one perception of one aspect of reality. And so these are just some observations I've been making. There's just a lot of judgment, and people have no idea that they're making all these judgments because it's their own version of normalcy. But when we can let go of that fear and that automatic sensations and be aware of how our brain is making these comparisons and associations and strict perceptions of normalcy, and realize that that's not the whole story, that just because our mind is telling us something doesn't mean it's the truth of the situation. It's just one perspective of one aspect of reality, not all of reality. um, I think this would just really help revolutionize the connection that humankind experiences within themselves. Um, so yeah, I just found that really fascinating. And then the other little piece was topics of discussion tend to be about people and concrete experiences. It's a very explicit thing. But if we can shift from explicit to implicit by discussing ideas and sensational aspects of experience, we would improve connection and bridge worlds of consciousness by focusing on the things that all consciousnesses experience. Talking about people and concrete experiences doesn't get us anywhere. It's a very superficial connection, and a lot of people are fine with that. But I really think that's just because they don't see that there could be something deeper because they've never experienced it. And their own version of normalcy holds them in that box of we talk about people and we talk about physical experiences, and that's how we build friendships, and that's how we build relationships, and that's how we connect with people. And I kind of perceive this as being the way things have been. And we're moving into a new dimension where we're no longer limited by that aspect. Like, we no longer have to have those superficial relationships because we as a human species can understand the expansion of the human consciousness, and how if we talk about more implicit things like conceptual ideas and sensations of experience, we can connect with ourselves and connect with each other in a much deeper manner. And those deeper connections are going to be more fulfilling. They're going to encourage growth. They're going to create new experiences rather than just recycling the old ones. And there's just going to be a lot more dynamic depth to the human experience through intrapersonal and interpersonal relationships. So that was a pretty cool observation. And then memory fragments came up, and if it's not the explicit, concrete, linear experience, if it's a memory from long ago or from childhood or whatever. It's about memory fragments, and these are singular sensational aspects of experience. And so to remember, the way someone smells, or to remember one visual of one scene, or, to remember these sensational aspects, these singular sensational aspects of experience, those are memory fragments. And having language for this can really just deepen the relationship humankind has within itself, because we can have a renewed appreciation for our minds, and we can have a renewed appreciation for the minds of others, where even if we're not necessarily connecting with the specifics, the explicit, we can connect with the appreciation of how the mind works, and how these are memory fragments, or these are fully processed explicit memories, and to understand the miracle of these things, to understand the pure, raw, radical miracle of it, so that no matter what the specifics are, we have this sense of compassion and creating space for one another. I really like that. And then I was able to share my health vision. They were talking about my cousin who is doing nursing stuff, and she's right now taking a psych course, and they're talking about bipolar disorder and meds and all these things. And I explained my mission, and how, from one perspective, it's a bit terrifying that there's this worldwide healthcare system that has nothing to do with health or care. It's just a system based on money making, and it's now something people are being taught about very standardly. Like, people going into nursing that's not related to mental health are being sucked into this misinformation. And they're going to become, the people who work at the hospitals and help the people. And it's intense. And so it kind of revived my passion for the mission. And if I were to do a speech, I think it could be kind of cool to share a brief peek of my story, and then to share the flaws of the existing system, which include how diagnoses overlap. Like, a diagnosis says you have these things, and these things are not associated with any other disorder. But then you have all these other disorders, and there's like this overlap where the diagnosing is not very legit. They're really just slapping on whatever labels they want, rather than following a standard system. Like, if you have this disorder and it says that you have these things and they don't belong to another disorder, then you can't be diagnosed with something else that has those same things. That's not how medicine works. If one of the definitions of a diagnosis is the symptoms are not caused by another illness, then you can't have another diagnosis that has the same symptoms that goes against itself. It's like crossing each other out. There's no consistency within the diagnoses. What the diagnosis you get depends on the doctor you see. It's very subjective. And the fact that you can have all these overlapping diagnoses kind of shows the invalidity of the diagnosing system. And then secondly, the actual DSM says that it's not intended to be used for treating patients. And yet, when they made the third edition, like, it says that in there, but it's being used to diagnose and treat and prescribe medications worldwide. But it was never intended to do that, according to the actual book that the diagnoses are coming from. And then for the American Psychiatric Association to be continually rewriting the DSM without actually making improvements, just so they can make another $1 million by selling their book, like, it's really obvious that it's not about the healthcare. And then the other really obvious thing is that mental health diagnoses, suicide, depression, and disability from mental health battles are on the rise now more than ever. The numbers are increasing more than they ever have in history. And yet, simultaneously, and not coincidentally, psychiatric medications are being prescribed now more than ever. If the healthcare system was based on healthcare, where it was addressing the problem, being honest about it, and providing effective treatment, then these numbers wouldn't exist the way that they do. It's a very, very black and white, obvious truth. Um, there's other aspects of things that may be, like, well, I don't know if I believe that, but these are numbers. Like, it's really, like, you can't really argue with numbers. Like it's the one very factual place we can go to at this discussion. And the whole foundation for the system is based on observing external behaviors, which tell you nothing about what the brain and body system are doing to cause those behaviors. And it's treating neurotransmitters with chemicals. Neurotransmitters don't need treating. Neurotransmitters don't need treating. They balance out themselves when you address the actual core components of mental health, which include things like habits of mind, habits of body, brainwave regulation, and nervous system regulation. And for them to be promoting that these things work with your brain body chemistry when that's a lie, if it worked with our chemistry, then there would be natural things in the medicine that work with our chemistry. But they don't. They have man-made chemicals cooked up in a lab. And that's so that they can own the patents on them. But you can't have man-made chemicals work with our chemistry. It would have to include something natural to naturally work with us. Like, that's just another kind of, it seems fairly obvious to me, sort of deals. Like, CBD, for example, actually works with our chemistry. We have cannabinoids in our brain body system already, but there's no lithium in my body. You can't give me lithium and say it's going to work with my system. That's a lie. That's a bold-faced lie. And then all these people are getting all these short-term and long-term side effects from the medication, and that often brings as much devastation as the original problems. But it's the only system that exists, so people trust the system, and they trust the doctors, and they trust the medications. And psychiatrists are prescribing newer medications because they're being sold on these new medications. But if I'm being prescribed a medication that was just invented in the last year, how trustworthy is that? And that's like the standard treatment being offered. I've been in it. I was a patient for years. I'm not talking from an outside perspective. I was in the system. I know how it works. And so if I were to give a speech, it would point out the problems of the system and then present an alternate solution, which is addressing the core components of mental health and addressing the brain-body system from where it's actually experiencing these things. If we just look from the outside in, like if someone has cancer, as one dramatic example, and a doctor looks at their physical symptoms and treats the physical symptoms without exploring what's causing it, is that doctor providing effective health care? No. So why on the effing mother effing planet would people think that looking from the outside and observing behaviors would give someone the tools needed to treat the mind that's being experienced within the brain-body system when those people have no knowledge of consciousness and they're not looking from the inside for potential stuff? And if you see that there's a dysregulation in neurotransmitters, why wouldn't you go deeper than that? What's causing that dysregulation? Like, yeah. So to provide the alternate solution of, okay, well, how do we treat healthcare then, mental health care? If the system that's established now isn't doing it, how do we do that? And so that's really what I think my speech would be about. And to just kind of write an outline and then just practice speaking and record and just kind of see what comes out, and then find the things that feel the strongest and make a note of that, I think would be a good way to develop our speech. We were trying to do it in our head, and I need to realize that's not always the best way. Like, sometimes we go back in our mind and we can get like a generalized feeling, vision of stuff. And sometimes in our meditations, we get these specific epiphanies where we connect the dots and find a new answer. But if we're creating a speech with all these different concepts and trying to tie them together. The best way to practice that is to speak. So we'll hopefully be exploring and playing with that more. And yep. Oh, and then the other part was to say, these diagnoses matter when we're talking about like the problem of the existing system. These diagnoses matter. These doctors are providing insights and answers and validation, and supposed to be providing hope for these experiences that people have been struggling with probably for a long time. And people carry around a diagnosis and associate it with who they are. And the diagnosis determines the treatment approach based on the existing system, which is rooted in psychiatric medication. And the whole foundation of that is so flawed because people are being misinformed about what's happening within them. I mean, my experiences were considered psychosis. And so by definition, what I was experiencing wasn't real. And I carried around that label with me for a long time. And then to have the treatment being offered be miserable as hell, the side effects were excruciatingly miserable. And I went through that believing I was trusting the right people, Like, it wasn't just a walk in the park. I was sacrificing actively for years in my personal life, in my health, in my experiences, all of these things. And I was suffering because I was trusting these doctors to know best. And they didn't. They didn't. Even when I was throwing up every day for over a month, I was instructed to stay on the medication because it just needed time to work with my system, and I just needed to get used to it. And even months later, when I landed in the emergency room from side effects so severe, my doctors instructed me to stay on the medication. And when I finally said, I've had enough, this isn't working, I need to get off these meds, they said I was non-compliant and obstructing their care treatments, and they blocked me off from mental health care facilities in the entire city because I was just some crazy person. And that's the system that exists. And I had given everything to be in that treatment. I had sacrificed so much to focus on my mental health healing, even when it cost me jobs, homes, friendship, my health, my sanity, my everyday sense of experience because I was just consumed by side effects. I'd sacrificed everything, and they finally were just like, we don't want to deal with you anymore. And that's the healthcare that was being offered to me. And in my early 20s, I thought I had no life, no future. I wasn't worth it. There was no hope. There was nothing anyone could do. And after quitting the system that I was in for years, I fully recovered in 2 years. From 2 decades of traumatic stress. 2 years I fully recovered. So this is a story that needs to be told, and we don't need to be afraid to share it.